Here begins videotape number 1, the deposition of Michelle Frock in the matter of Cynthia Allen et al. Versus Alan Burks, MD et al. To be heard in the Circuit Court of Baltimore City, Maryland. Case number 24-C-15-003384 Today's date is March 31st, year 2016. The time is now 10:28 a.m. The video operator today is Scott Pickering. This video deposition taking place at the address of 11350 McCormick Road, Suite 1200, Executive Plaza 3, Hunt Valley, Maryland. Counsel, please first identify yourselves and state who you represent.
Rodney Gaston. I represent Cynthia Allen, the estate of Dennis Allen, and Dennis Allen's children.
Good morning. My name is Ronald Shaw. I represent Dr. Burks.
The court reporter today is Tony Thompson of DTI Court Reporting Solutions. Will the reporter please swear the witness?
Would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Ma'am, could you please state your name and address?
Michelle Frock, 4308 Southfield Drive, Nottingham, Maryland, 21236.
Okay. Ms. Frock, are you being represented by an attorney today for your deposition?
Yes, she is.
Is that you, Mr. Shaw? Okay, thank you. All right. Ma'am, my name is Rod Gaston. I'm an attorney, and I represent Cynthia Allen and the estate of Dennis Allen and his children in an action that's currently pending in the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. The action involves medical care that was provided to the late Dennis Allen in March of 2013. The reason I've asked you here to appear for your deposition today is because your name appears in the medical chart, and it appears that you may have had some involvement with Dennis Allen's care during the time he was a patient at University of Maryland Hospital. But before I start the questions and we get your answers, have you ever had your deposition taken before?
No.
Okay. I'm going to go over some of the ground rules so we can get an accurate record of the proceeding. Although the videographer is taking down the videotape, the court reporter is also here to take down my questions and your answers. And she can't take down both of us talking at the same time. So I'll ask if you could just wait until I finish asking my question before you answer, because I know you're probably going to anticipate some of my questions and you probably want to just blurt out the answer. But I'd ask if you just be a little patient. And then I'll try not to interrupt you while you're answering the question. Also, if I ask a question that you don't understand, tell me immediately, and I'll try to rephrase the question, because if you don't, we'll assume that you've understood the question and you've answered it appropriately. Can you follow those simple rules?
Yes.
Okay. If you need to take a break at any time, just let us know,
Okay.
and we'll take a break. Ms. Frock, your attorney has handed me a document that we've been marked as Exhibit Number 2, and I'll ask if you could take a look at that document. Is that a current and up-to-date version of your resume or CV?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. And it looks like from your CV, you were employed at the University of Maryland Medical Center beginning in October of 2009, and were you continuously employed there until June of 2014?
Yes.
Okay. Were you always employed as a nurse at University of Maryland Medical Center?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me in March of 2013 what shift you were working?
We were rotating at that time. So it was a 6-week schedule that 4 shifts out of that 6-week schedule had to be a night shift, which would be 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.
All right. And so you worked 4 12-hour shifts, and then you were off for 3 days? How'd that work?
No, so a 6-week schedule, it's 3 12-hour shifts a week. Out of that entire 6-week schedule, 4 of the shifts had to be a night shift, so rotating.
Okay. All right.
Primarily working day shift.
All right. And is the day shift 7 o'clock a.m. to 7 o'clock p.m.?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Do you remember anything about Dennis Allen? Separate and apart from the medical record. We'll get to the medical records. I want to know in your own mind, do you have a memory of Dennis Allen?
I do.
Okay. Tell me what you remember from Dennis Allen, separate and apart from the medical record.
Objection as to the form and scope, but you can answer.
He was elderly gentleman. He was a pastor. I met him, his wife, and his kids. They were a nice family. They were friendly.
Okay. Do you remember any specifics about the care that you provided to Mr. Allen on any particular day, what you did for him, medications you administered, assistance you provided him?
Objection. You can answer.
Not until this case came up did I remember him.
Okay, tell me what you remember about the care that you may have provided for him.
Objection. You can answer.
On the day that I first took care of him, which was the 18th of March, I remember coming in that morning, you know, taking care of him. He started to kind of go have some changes than what his baseline had been that particular day. I guess I'm not really sure how much, like, do you want to know how the whole day went?
As much as you can remember. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That's what
Right.
I'm here
And
to
then
find out.
he's asking you, independent of the medical records.
Oh, okay. Yeah, independent of the medical records, I didn't remember a whole lot except from when I went back to that day that I took care of him.
Okay. Have you told me what you can remember without looking at the chart so far? Or do you remember other
Okay.
things?
The 18th, then, I don't remember a whole lot aside from looking at the chart. The 19th is the day that I more remember taking care of him.
Okay. And what do you remember? And what shift were you working? Were you working
Day
at-
shift.
Day shift. Okay. And what do you remember about the 19th?
The 19th,
Objection. You can answer.
coming in that morning, I remember the night physician was in the room with the night nurse, that they had been having difficulty overnight trying to establish IV access, that he had gotten pretty sick overnight. He was disoriented, being a little combative, yelling, just not being very agreeable to the care we were trying to provide him.
Was that different from what you knew of him the day before?
Yes.
All right. Did you have any understanding of why he was disoriented, why he was combative, or why he was yelling?
Objection. You can answer.
Just the report that I had kind of gotten right at the bedside, because like I said, the physician was in there, the nurse was in there, that just overnight he kind of had a change in mental status. He just wasn't doing as well as he had been.
Okay. And this is not something you observed of Mr. Allen, but this is something that the physician and night nurse verbally conveyed to you when you arrived for your morning shift?
Objection.
Correct. And then once I was in the room and saw his behavior, then it was confirmed that it wasn't how he had acted the night or the day before.
Tell me what you saw of his behavior.
I know at that point they were trying to establish IV access, and he was just kind of, I don't want any of this, I don't want anybody to touch me, just verbally, like, refusing care.
All right. Did you make a note in the chart as to any refusal of medical care by Mr. Allen on the 19th that you remember?
I don't remember.
Okay. Is that something you would note in the chart or not?
Yeah, I would note his behavior and how he was acting.
All right. I'm focusing more specifically on a refusal of care with respect to care that you wanted to provide Mr. Allen, whatever that care may have been, and he refused it. Is there a policy at the hospital that you're aware of at the time that required nurses to make a notation in the chart when patient had refused medical care?
I don't know.
Okay. What was your custom and practice when that happened?
That if he was refusing care, I would let the physician know.
All right. And that would be to let the attending
The
physician?
attending physician.
All right. And would you make a note of the type of care that refused and a note that you notified the attending physician in the chart?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Anything else that you remember about the 19th?
Just that around, I want to say, like, it was early morning, 9 or 10 a.m., they had called the critical care team, which would be like an upper level of care, to come evaluate him and then he was transferred to the ICU for a more one-on-one type care.
Do you know whether or not he received the central line on the 18th or 19th while you were there?
I don't remember.
Don't recall? All right. Now, with respect to how medication orders are carried out by nurses such as you, can you tell me what that process is? How do you find out that a patient needs a particular medicine at a particular time? Is it a verbal? Is it by computer? I know some nurses have a handheld mobile device that an alert comes up and they check the device and that's how they know. But can you explain how you carry that out?
Objection is to form, you can answer.
When the physician orders a medication, they'll put that order through the computer. And when I log on to the computer system under the patient's name, I can then see that what specific medication was ordered. I have the option then to review the medication, which is just basically hitting a button that says nurse reviewed. But I can still see the order without reviewing it.
Okay. And is the button nurse reviewed a confirmation that you can push the button and the computer then knows that you have reviewed the medicine orders for that patient?
Correct.
Okay. So you can look at the order without pushing the nurse reviewed, or you can look at the order, medicine order, and push the nurse reviewed.
Correct.
Does it matter in your practice what you usually do?
Objection.
In this case, it's not always timely to be sitting at the computer, that I would be with the patient. And so if I've reviewed a certain medication after the fact that it was ordered, it just means that that was the time that I actually got to the computer to chart things.
Right. And the computer that we're talking about, is it a desktop computer or is it on one of those mobile devices that you can move from patient's room to patient's room?
It's a desktop.
Okay. And is it at the central nurses station for the floor that you're on?
On our unit, there were 3 nurses stationed. This one was at the center nurses station, which was right across from the room that the patient was in.
Okay. Do you also have a handheld device that you use in order to document the administration of medicine to a patient?
No.
Okay. So can you tell me how would you, if you went to the computer and looked up the medicine orders, would the computer also tell you the time that the patient is to receive the medication?
Yes.
Okay. Now, would you make a mental note of that? Would you write it down? How would you remind yourself, for example, if Mr. Allen needed insulin in 2 hours? How would you remind yourself to do that? How would you do that?
It was my practice to write it down on my report sheet that I carried around in my pocket.
Now, is this report sheet just for your own notes, or is this something that's also made part of the patient's chart?
Just my own notes.
And do you discard them at the end of the shift?
I do.
Okay, all right. All right. Now, if a patient needs a particular medicine, how does the medicine arrive at the floor?
If the medication is stocked on the unit in the Omnicell, which is the machine that holds some of our medications, I can go to that machine, put my password in, select the patient that I'd like to withdraw meds on, and then any medication that's available in that Omnicell machine would be highlighted, so to speak, and then I could press what I wanted and the machine would open whatever door it was that I could take it out.
Okay. Are you able to access medicine in the Omnicell without going through the process that you just described?
No.
Okay. I deposed the pharmacist a couple of days ago, and he says that, and I don't know if you were aware of his testimony, but I'm just trying to understand. He said there's an override button on the Omnicell that nurses can push in order to access medicine. Are you familiar with an override button?
Yes.
Okay, tell me about the override button.
Override would be going under the patient's name, and there's a button that says override. You can type in what medication you want to pull out, and some medications are able to be overridden. Some are not.
All right. You're going to have to explain that to me because I don't know which medications you're allowed to override and which you aren't.
I'm not sure. Some medications are, some are not. I can't speak to which are and aren't off the top of my head.
Have you ever used the override button at University of Maryland Hospital?
Yes.
Can you tell me under what circumstances you would use the override button?
Objection.
In emergency situations.
Okay. And how would they come up? Would it be, you could explain the emergency situations in your custom practice. What would, give me a typical emergency situation.
Objection. You can answer.
I don't know if that's tough. If a medication was needed for emergency, I can't think of a medication offhand. I could go there under the patient's name, attempt to override it, and if that medication was allowed to be taken out, then the Omnicell would let me have it, if that makes sense.
Okay. And who would have to direct you? Now, these would be medications that are not already ordered for the patient, but a new medication?
Correct.
Okay. So if a patient goes into cardiac arrest, and the doctors come and they say, Nurse Frock, I need epinephrine, or I need an emergency supply of this drug for the patient, you can then go to the Omnicell, put in the patient's name, push override, and if it's one of the drugs that the computer allows you to override, you'll be able to access the medication.
In that case, we would use the crash cart.
Okay. All right. All right. So are there emergency medications on the crash cart?
Yes.
And are there emergency medications also on the Omnicell?
Yes.
All right. So if an emergency situation happens, would you first go to the crash cart for easy access before you went to the Omnicell?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Now, can you tell me, are you familiar with calcium gluconate?
I've heard of that medication before. I'm not.
Do you know if you ever administered to a patient?
I don't remember if I
Okay.
have.
Are you familiar with the medication calcium chloride?
Again, I've heard of that medication.
Have you ever administered that to a patient, as far as you know?
I cannot remember.
Okay. All right. Do you know if either calcium gluconate or calcium chloride are kept on the crash cart?
I don't know.
Can you tell me how many times during your tenure at University of Maryland that you had to go to the crash cart and get emergency medicine for an emergency situation?
Maybe 10.
10 times? All right. And all those 10 times, was it at the direction of a physician?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, and for the times, can you tell me how many times you went to the Omnicell and pushed the override button to get medication for a patient on an emergency basis?
Objection.
I don't know. Not that many times, but I don't know that I could give it a number.
Fewer than the times you had to go to the crash cart?
Yes.
All right. And all the times you went to the Omnicell to push the override to get emergency medicine for a patient, was that also at the direction of a physician?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, when you go to the Omnicell for medication, emergency situations, and you push in your code, is that information captured in the hospital's computer?
I believe so.
Okay. And are there medications that are available in the Omnicell that you can administer it to a patient on a non-emergency basis?
Can you repeat that?
Right. We talked about medications that you can go to the Omnicell to get on an emergency basis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about on a regular basis. For example, if the doctor orders insulin and it's available in the Omnicell, can you also go to the Omnicell to access that medication?
To override it, or if it's
No,
already ordered?
if it's already ordered.
Insulin is not kept in the Omnicell, but
I'm sorry, I don't know what
No, that's
what
fine.
is or is not kept, but assuming for the purposes of the question that a medication's been ordered for a patient that's available in the Omnicell. Can you access the Omnicell to administer that medication?
Yes,
Every time you do that, does the computer have a record of that?
I believe so.
Okay. Now, let's talk about verbal orders of physicians. Have you ever complied with a verbal order of a physician while you were a nurse at University of Maryland Hospital?
I don't remember.
Okay. Can you tell me the procedures? Are you familiar with the procedures that nurses have to follow if they get a verbal order for medicine from a physician?
We're not supposed to take them as nurses. That's one of the first things that we're taught.
Oh, okay. So if a doctor says, Nurse Frock, go get this medication for me for this patient, what do you tell the doctor?
The policy would state when the physician gives us the order, we are supposed to verbally repeat the order back to them to make sure that it's correct. And then the physician is supposed to confirm that, yes, that's what they want.
But I thought you're not supposed to take verbal orders from physicians.
Only in very emergent situations.
All right, so let's talk about those emergent situations where you can take verbal orders from physician. The physician says, Ms. Frock, I need this medication for this patient. Then you repeat the doctor's order back to himself in order for him to confirm it, correct?
Correct.
That there's no miscommunication between the doctor and the nurse.
Correct.
And then do you immediately try to find that medication for the patient?
That's how it's supposed to work, yes.
Okay. Now, if the medication is not on the floor, how would you get the medication up to the floor?
That I'm not sure of because I've never had that situation.
Okay. If the medication's on the floor, it would have to be either in the crash cart or in the Omnicell. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Okay. If it's in the crash cart, you simply go to the crash cart. Does the crash cart have a computer lock on it as well?
No, it has like a tag lock on it that you can just break open with your hand.
Oh, it's sealed.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So, and anytime you break the lock on the crash cart to access it, you have to make a note in the file.
Anytime the lock is broken, whether you've taken medications out or not, that crash cart has to go down to the warehouse to be restocked and resealed.
Do you have to make a note of that in the chart?
There is paperwork on the crash cart that makes note of that.
Okay, so there's some record maintained by the hospital anytime a nurse breaks a lock on the crash cart to get medication out. Would that be a fair statement?
Objection.
Correct.
And if the doctor breaks a lock, there would also be a record of that as well.
Objection.
There would be a record that the crash cart was opened.
Regardless of who opened it.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Now, how would you document a verbal order in an emergency situation that you complied with?
Objection.
You would, if you had, you would write it down.
Okay. Would you have to, would it be a computer entry or a handwritten note by a nurse?
That I'm not sure of. We have paper charts on the unit, like the patient's bedside chart, where we can annotate, notes that are going on about the day.
All right. So that would be one place where a nurse could note that she carried out a verbal order from a physician, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, can a nurse also make an entry into the computer itself? Dr. Smith gave me a verbal order, I repeated it back to him, and then I administered the drug to the patient.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Is it fair that any time a nurse at University of Maryland Hospital administers medication to the patient, the nurse has to make a record of it in the chart?
Objection.
To chart that the medication was given, is that what you're asking?
Right, there has to be a notation made in the chart.
Yes.
Objection.
Okay. All right. Now, Was the unit that you were working on on March 18th and March 19th, did they have dialysis machines in the patient's room?
No.
Okay. So are you aware that Mr. Allen had dialysis on March 18th?
Yes.
Okay. How did the dialysis machine get there? Who brings it? Do you bring it, or does some other staff brings it?
The dialysis technician.
Okay. Dialysis technician, do they wheel the dialysis machine into the patient's room?
Yes.
Do you assist them in any way with the dialysis of the patient?
No.
Okay. And when the dialysis is done, do the dialysis technicians take the machine and remove it from the patient's room?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit Number 1. These are selected pages of the medical record. And before we begin, have you had a chance to review Mr. Allen's medical records, at least with respect to the day of March 18th and March 19th?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to refer to a page number that's at the bottom of the page in Exhibit 1. And we're going to go through the pages. I'm going to ask you some questions. And please feel free to take a look at the documents. Page 84, is any of your handwriting on that page?
No.
Okay. How about page 85?
No.
All right. Page 100?
Nope.
Okay. Now, we have pages here of orders that are next. I want to go to page 438, and at the bottom of the page we have an order for calcium gluconate 1 gram. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And are you familiar with this type of entry system in the hospital records at University of Maryland Hospital?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it says here that this order was entered by Dr. Burks. Would that be correct?
Yes.
And it was to start at 3/18/13 at 12:37 hour with a stat priority. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Now, does a nurse put in this start time in priority, or is that done by the doctor?
By the doctor.
Okay. Now, where it says accepted, Frock Michelle, would that be you?
Yes.
Okay, and it says you accepted the order on 3/18/13 at 13:42 hours. What does that mean when it says accepted?
That means that I went into the patient's chart and that nurse review button, that I hit that nurse review button to say that I've seen the order, or that I've accepted the order.
Okay. Accepted the order simply means that you've looked at it in the computer and pushed the button, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Doesn't mean that you administered it.
No.
Okay. All right. Now, okay, if we can go to we're going to jump to page 328. Actually, what I'm trying to find is the next time, very first time that you administered medication to Mr. Allen, and I think it's farther back in the chart, earlier on. So let me just go through that a minute. Okay, page 364.
Let me look at that real quick.
Sure. Top of the order, it says mnemonic CK. Can you tell me what that represents?
I'm not Sure. This looks like when the physician would put in orders for a blood draw.
Okay. All right. And does it look like you reviewed and accepted that order placed by Dr. Burks on March 18th at 12:29?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the order details, who types in those order details?
The ordering physician.
Okay, where it says blood, ST, do you know what ST stands for?
Stat.
Okay, and that's a hyphen stat. Nurse collect, 3/18/13, 12:25. Do you know what that references?
That the physician ordered a stat blood draw on whatever the lab is at that time.
Okay, and then you reviewed that order and accepted it at 12:29 p.m.
Correct.
Okay. Now, does the order form indicate when the medications are given, or is this simply referencing the orders that are placed for this patient?
This would be in the computer under orders, so it would just say what was ordered.
Okay. Now,
When you say this, refer to the page.
I'm sorry, on page 364, this order set of labs would
Okay.
be under orders in the computer.
all right, if we go to page 361. In the middle of the page, it says mnemonic, insulin regular, order status completed, ordering physician, it says contributor system Omnicell, order placed by contributor system Omnicell. Do you know why the contributor system is noted to be Omnicell on both of those?
I do not know.
Okay. From your review of the chart, do you know whether you were the nurse who administered the Kexlate to Mr. Allen on March the 18th?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell me where you got the supply of Kexlate from? Did it come up from the pharmacy, or was it in the Omnicell?
I do not remember where it came from.
Okay. Can you go to page number 170? And can you tell me whether or not your handwriting appears on any of those pages?
When you say any of those pages, you...
I'm sorry, 170. Thank you.
No.
All right. You go to page 171. Can you tell me if any of your handwriting appears on that page?
No.
Okay. Go to page 172. Tell me if any of your handwriting appears on that page.
No.
Okay. 173, does any of your handwriting appear on that page?
No.
Okay. How about page 174?
No.
page 175,
No,
176,
no,
177,
no,
178,
no,
179.
no.
Okay, well, let's stick with page 179 for a moment. With the box from 0700 to 1900, would that cover the period of time that you were actually acting as Mr. Allen's nurse on March 18, 2013?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me if the handwriting is from a nurse's tech, or a physician?
It's from a nurse.
Okay. Do you know the nurse who made the notes?
Yes.
What's her name?
Kathy Wolko.
Okay. And were you and Ms. Wolko both assigned to Mr. Allen that day?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 2 nurses for Mr. Allen. Was there also a nursing technician that was also assigned to him for that day?
Yes.
Okay, do you know who the nursing tech was?
I don't remember.
Okay. And can you tell me how you would divide up the nursing task between you and Ms. Wolko for Mr. Allen on March 18, 2013?
At this time, I was precepting Kathy.
Precepting means you were teaching her?
Yes.
Okay.
She was
All right,
the
so...
nurse on the unit. And
Was
I was
she-
her. She was my orientee.
Okay. Did you instruct her what tasks to be carried out for Mr. Allen?
Everything that we did for Mr. Allen, we did together, so
Okay, that was going to be my next question. Okay. So every time Ms. Wilco says here, medications were administered, which it looks like at 1,400 hours. We have some medications that were administered to Mr. Allen. That means both you and Ms. Wilco were present and administered the medication together. Would that be?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Now, it looks like at 13-15 hours, administered 30 grams kxalate. And can you read the rest of that for me, the rest of that chart?
50 milliequivalents of sodium bicarb in 50 mLs, IV push. Do you want me to keep reading
Yes,
all of
ma'am,
it?
please. Mhm.
At 1323, finger stick equals 147. At 1400, finger stick equals 157. Also administered Zofran, 4 milligrams at 1240. Dialysis is being performed at bedside.
Okay. If you had administered calcium gluconate or calcium chloride to Mr. Allen on March 18, 2013, between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., would there be a notation, a handwritten notation, in this chart on page 179 to reference that medication?
Objection.
Not necessarily.
Okay. Why would you administer medication to a patient and not note it in the patient's chart for Mr. Allen on page 179 if that actually happened?
Objection. You can answer.
Ultimately, the medications that are documented in the chart in the EMAR.
The medical administration record?
Yes.
Okay. So, all the medication that you administered to Mr. Allen on March 18, 2013, between the hours of 7 o'clock a.m. and 7 o'clock p.m. would be entered in the computer chart under the medical administration record, correct?
Objection.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Now, as far as you know, did any other nurse administer any type of medication to Mr. Allen between the hours of 7 o'clock a.m. and 7 o'clock p.m. on March 18, 2013?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Why aren't you sure?
Objection.
Let me ask another question. You were his nurse, correct?
Correct.
And you were responsible for the administration of medication that was ordered by the doctors to Mr. Allen on that day, correct?
Objection.
Okay. Are you aware, do you remember any other nurse coming in during your shift and administering medication to Mr. Allen on March 18th between 7 o'clock a.m. and 7 o'clock p.m. other than yourself?
I don't remember.
Okay. And if any nurse had done that, according to the policies and procedures with the hospital, they would have to make a note of that medication administration in the computer in this chart. Would that be a fair statement?
Objection.
That's what the policy says we're supposed to do.
Okay. All right. Do you know of any nurses working your shift that don't follow that policy?
Objection.
I don't know.
Okay. All right. As far as you know, the nurses that work with you on the shift on this particular unit follow the hospital's policies and protocols with respect to the noting of medication that they administer to patients. Would that be a fair statement?
Objection. You can answer.
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. Yeah. When you came in for your 7 o'clock a.m. shift, what is the standard protocol that you follow when you relieve another nurse, and particularly the nurses that had been caring for Mr. Allen on the midnight shift?
On this particular day or in general?
Well, we can go to general and then we can go to specific. So let's start with general first. What would your general policy and practice be?
Okay. So we come on the unit, and at 7 o'clock we're at the nurse's station looking at the assignment sheet to see which patients we're assigned to. From there, we go and find the nurse that was taking care of the patient for the night shift and sit at a computer, open up the patient's chart to review what went on overnight and do a verbal report.
Okay. Verbal report is where one nurse talks to another nurse to explain what happened to the patient, with the patient overnight?
Correct.
Okay. Now, if a patient is supposed to have blood drawn during the midnight shift, and that doesn't happen, for whatever reason, is the nurse who's working the midnight shift supposed to make a notation of that in the patient's chart?
Objection.
They're not supposed to. They should. I'm sorry. They're not supposed to, but it should be conveyed to the next shift.
Okay. How come, now you worked a midnight shift, correct?
I have.
Okay. And if on the midnight shift the doctor orders that blood is to be drawn from the patient at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it doesn't happen, are you telling me that for you as that patient's nurse does not have to make a written notation into the chart that that did not happen?
Objection.
I would.
That's your custom and practice?
That's my practice.
Okay.
My practice.
Now, what is the policy for the nurses who work in your unit for that situation? Are they supposed to make a notation in the chart if blood is supposed to be drawn from a patient at 4 o'clock in the morning and it doesn't happen?
Objection is to form.
They are supposed to let the covering physician know that the patient refused.
Right. And is that notification of the attending physician supposed to be documented in the chart?
Objection.
It should.
Now, if a patient on the midnight shift refuses to have their blood drawn, now this is a flat-out refusal, is that incident supposed to be noted in the chart?
Objection.
It should be noted if they're refusing any of their care.
Okay. And particularly with respect to a refusal of patient care, is a nurse also supposed to notify the attending physician?
Correct.
Objection.
Okay. Now, when you came on duty at 7 o'clock a.m. on March 18th, did you sit down and review the computer record of Mr. Allen and review what happened with his care the night before?
I don't remember if we sat down at the computer, but we would have gotten a report from the night shift.
Okay. Do you usually, is it your custom and practice to sit down at the computer and review the computer chart?
That was my practice, yes.
Do you think you followed that practice in this case?
Objection.
I don't remember.
Okay. Did you at least get a report from the nurse that you were relieving as to what happened with Mr. Allen the night before?
Yes, I did.
Okay. According to the records, did the nurse relate to you that Mr. Allen refused his 4:30 a.m. blood draw from the chart?
Do you have from the 17th, the flow sheets from the 17th?
I do. I'm going to hand you what's been previous. Well, I'm going to hand you an entire chart, and you can look at the flow sheets. And if you, whenever you reference a page, if you can just tell what number you're referencing at the bottom.
So page 171.
Okay. And what is page 171?
It's the back sheet of the patient's flow sheet where nurses can annotate notes that went on during their shift.
Okay. If a patient refused to have his blood drawn, would page 171, would that be where you would look to see for that notation?
Objection.
That's where I would look.
And that's why you're looking there now.
Correct.
Okay. Do you see any notation, handwritten note from a nurse on the midnight shift, a nurse that you relieved, where he or she made any reference to Mr. Allen refusing a blood test?
I do not see any notation that he refused a blood draw.
Okay. And if the nurse had told you that Mr. Allen had refused his blood test at 4 o'clock in the morning, would you then contact the attending physician for your shift to let that physician know that a blood test for Mr. Allen had not been completed during the midnight shift?
Objection.
Yes.
Okay. From the chart, do you see any reference that ever happened in this case? Your notification of a doctor that Mr. Allen had refused a blood test?
My
Objection.
notification or
Yeah.
the night nurse's notification?
Your notification.
No.
Okay. All right. Can you tell me if you can remember, you mentioned something about Mr. Allen not wanting to receive some care on the 19th. From the chart, can you tell me what care he refused, if at all?
From the chart or from my memory?
Well, I didn't know you had a memory of exactly what he refused, but if you do, let us know.
So are you asking for
Yeah, what's
both, or
your
what?
memory? You'll go to your memory first.
The morning of the 19th, I remember that they wanted to do a central line access because he had poor peripheral access, and that he wasn't wanting them to insert that line.
Okay. Anything else that you can remember?
That was the main thing that I remember.
Okay. Now, can you go to the chart? Do you see if that refusal is noted in the chart?
For the 19th, it looks like there's only the first page of the flow sheet in here.
Okay. And what page is that?
That would be 180.
All right. Let me show you the rest of the record.
There's a handwritten note on the 19th.
Let me see.
Yeah.
I think. Make sure we're on the same page.
That one.
Yes.
Okay, we'll take a look. And what page are you looking at, ma'am?
This is page 186.
Okay, what do you see on page 186?
A handwritten note in the morning that I wrote.
Okay, can you read that to me, word for word?
0900, assumed care of patient being prepared for bedside hemodialysis, pressures dropped to 90s over 40s, hemodialysis delayed. A line inserted, left IJ triple lumen catheter inserted, fluids bolus 1000 ml total. Norepinephrine started at 5 mg per minute. Zosyn running, awaiting x-ray to confirm IJ placement. And then at 11:50, report called to MICU, which is the medical intensive care unit.
Okay. Is the A line referenced in there, is that the central line or something different?
The A line is a line that goes into the into the artery for a constant rate of blood pressure.
And you're pointing to your wrist, is that where
My
it
wrist,
goes?
it goes into left or right artery of the wrist.
Thank you. Is there anything noted in your handwritten note on page 186
6.
about Mr. Allen's refusal to have a central line?
No.
Okay. Is there, and if you can flip through the next couple pages, is there anywhere in the chart or note that Mr. Allen did not want to have a central line?
No.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else that you can remember from March 19th, 2013 regarding Mr. Allen's care that you've not already told me?
Objection.
That morning, I remember his son was present and his wife, and they were helpful in allowing us to do the care that we needed. That he was refusing things and being difficult as to us providing care, and they were helpful in talking to the patient and helping him to understand that this care was necessary and that we were only trying to help him to get better.
And with the encouragement of his family, did he comply with your request for care?
Objection.
He did comply with care, yes.
Okay, all right. Now, do you remember how the KX-late was administered to Mr. Allen, whether it was in a liquid form or a powder form?
Liquid form.
Liquid form. Okay. Is this a telemetry unit that Mr. Allen was on?
It's a medical intermediate care unit, but every patient is on a telemetry monitor.
Okay, and what does a telemetry monitor monitor?
It monitors heart rate, respirations, and pulse ox at all times.
Does it go down to a central monitoring station somewhere else in the hospital, or is this monitoring screen at the nurse's station?
The monitoring screen is at each nurse's station.
Is there also a monitoring screen in the patient's room as well?
Correct.
Okay. Does it measure, it said it measures heart rate?
Yes.
Is there an alarm set on the machine if the patient's heart rate is too elevated or too reduced?
Yes.
Okay. When an alarm goes off, what do you as a nurse usually do?
First thing, I go into my patient's room to view the patient.
Okay. If it's alarm for the heart, does the computer automatically generate a printout of the heartbeat on the tape?
If an alarm is going off, then yes, the computer at the central monitor station at the nurse's station, it'll begin to print out what's going on.
Okay. And is that printout maintained in the client's chart, patient's chart?
Yes, a strip of their monitor will go into the patient's chart, yes.
Okay. Now, are you able to manually turn the alarm off?
Yes.
Okay. When you turn the alarm off, does the printer stop printing?
Yes, it will.
Okay. And in order for you to set the alarm back on, you'd have to turn it back on, correct?
The alarms are always on. In order to tell the printer to stop printing, we acknowledge the alarm, but the alarms are always on. So even if there's an incident with, like you said, a patient's heart rate goes too high, just by turning the printer off is saying, I've acknowledged this alarm, but it's still going to be there that if the patient's heart rate goes high again, it's going to alarm again.
Okay. So you can't manually shut that alarm off. Would that be correct?
You can turn the alarm off. You can manually go in and set parameters, is what I think you're referring to when you say alarm.
Okay. Let's make sure we're talking about the same
Okay.
thing. I presume there are parameters set in the software where if a patient's heart beats too high or too low, then the alarm's triggered, correct?
That's correct, and on our unit, we have parameters of what we make sure our alarms are set to every shift.
Okay. So is it the nurse's responsibility to set the parameters for the cardiac monitoring alarm?
Correct.
Okay. Now, can a nurse change the parameters for each individual patient?
Yes.
Okay. Can you do that on your own, or do you have to get a doctor's approval for that?
You can do that on your own.
Okay. Do you know in this case, from the chart that you have in front of you, whether or not Mr. Allen's alarm went off on March 18th?
From the medical record or from my memory?
Well, let's go with your memory. Do you have a memory of that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Tell me what you remember.
I remember he was having some drops in his heart rate. Bradycardia is what we call it.
Okay. And do you remember about what time that happened?
I want to say it was around noon.
Around noon? Okay. And is the reason, did the alarm go off? Is that what
Yes.
alerted you to the bradycardia?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do when the alarm went off?
When I say we, Kathy and I went into the room to look at the patient to see what was going on.
Okay. And do you remember what you saw?
Yep. Mr. Allen was just laying in the bed. He wasn't doing any strenuous activity. He was just laying there,
Okay.
awake and alert. And his cardiac monitor was, his heart rate was 80s, 90s, and then like having some drops to the 40s. And that's why it was alarming us, because any drop below a heart rate of 50 will tell the alarm to go off.
And would you interpret that to be a dangerous situation for the patient?
Yes.
Objection.
Okay. What, if anything, did you do when this cardiac alarm went off around 12 o'clock noon on March 18, 2013?
Objection. Go ahead.
Went into the room, observed the patient, asked him, does your heart feel funny? Do you feel like your heart's racing? Is it slow? Like, are you feeling any changes? And then upon making sure he was stable enough to leave the room, we went and told Dr. Burks what we had observed.
All right. Do you remember the conversation you had with Dr. Burks that day?
I don't remember it verbatim, just that we went and let him know that the patient was having some bradycardia episodes.
Okay. Was Dr. Burks on the actual floor in your unit at that time, or did you have to call him in from somewhere else?
He's on the floor at that time.
Okay. And did Dr. Burks, you and, is it Miss Wilco?
Wilco, yes.
Wilco, did you all go back into Mr. Allen's room while Dr. Burks assessed Mr. Allen's condition?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember if Dr. Burks gave you any specific instructions or any specific verbal orders that day for Mr. Allen?
He instructed us to do an EKG.
All right. Did you do that?
Yes, an EKG was completed.
Okay. Did Dr. Burks ask you or Ms. Wilco to do anything else other than the EKG?
Is this from memory or from the medical records?
From memory, and then if you can't remember, you can go to the chart.
I was going to say, from memory, I can't remember anything that he specifically would have asked us at that time.
Okay, from the chart.
Objection.
From the chart, what I had read earlier from page 179, at 12 o'clock while conducting assessment, patient's heart rate became bradycardic, intermittent to the 40s. Patient reported nausea and flushing. Finger stick was 68. Informed Dr. Burks. Administered orange juice. And then it goes on to say, Dr. Burks ordered 250 mLs D10W bolus.
Is that it? Is that what you have in the
Do you want me
chart?
to keep reading?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
please.
Finger stick 97 after bolus. That was at 1309. Administered amp of D50, 10 units regular insulin. At 1315, administered 30 grams Kxalate, 50 milliequivalent sodium bicarb, and 50 ml IV push. At 1323, finger stick is 147. 1400, finger stick is 157. Also administered Zofran, 4 milligrams at 1240. Dialysis is being performed at bedside.
Okay. According with the notes that you made on March 18, 2013, did Dr. Burks make any request of you for a verbal order of medicine for Mr. Allen?
According to my notes, no.
And you don't, and your memory doesn't differ from that, does it?
Objection.
Don't remember.
All right. Do you know if you remained in Mr. Allen's room to monitor his heart rate from the hours of 12 o'clock noon through 2 o'clock p.m.?
Did I remain in his room that entire 2-hour period?
Right. Can you tell me what you were doing for that 2-hour period?
Can't specifically say everything that I did, but I would have been in and out of the patient's room, assessing him, administering medications, checking orders in the computer.
Okay. Let's talk about the time period after now you administered insulin, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And sodium bicarbonate?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Was albuterol also administered?
From this note, it does not say.
Okay. Now, if after you administered the insulin and the sodium bicarbonate, Mr. Allen's cardiac monitor alarmed again, would that be something you would have noted in the chart?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And if that had happened, you would then immediately notify Dr. Burks, because that's what you did the first time the alarm went off, correct?
Objection.
I would have let the doctor know if the alarm was going off again,
Okay.
yes.
Would it be fair to say, because there's no notation in the alarm in the chart, that Mr. Allen's cardiac alarm went off after you administered the insulin and sodium bicarbonate, that more likely than not his cardiac alarm did not go off for the remainder of the shift?
That I cannot speak to.
But if it had went off, there would be a note of it, correct?
There would be, not a note, but I'm trying to think of what I want to say. Like an alarm. The central monitor keeps track of whenever the patient alarms. The patient can alarm for the heart rate not being in the parameters, blood pressure being out of the
Let's
parameters.
talk about the heart.
So just the heart rate.
Let me go back to the heart
Okay.
rate. You said you're not sure if the alarm went off after you administered the insulin and sodium bicarbonate. But from this chart, there's no record of the alarm going off after you administered those medications. Is that correct?
There's no notation that there was an alarm.
Okay. If there had been an alarm, I think you said you would made a note of it in the chart and you would notify Dr. Burke, correct?
Correct.
And my next question is, because there's no evidence of that in the chart that happened, do you agree more likely than not that Mr. Allen's cardiac alarm did not go off after you administered the insulin and the sodium bicarbonate?
Objection.
I really do not remember if it went off after those medications.
Well, I'm not asking you about your memory, I'm asking you from the chart. Because we don't have any evidence of the chart of the alarm going off after you administered the insulin and sodium bicarbonate, which if it had went off, it would have been in the chart. Can we then conclude more likely than not that his cardiac heart alarm did not go off after you administered those two drugs?
No, I object. That's 5 different questions. I object.
You can answer.
No, I'm not. I'm going to tell her not to answer that unless you break that down.
Did you understand my question?
No, she's my client. I'm telling her not to answer that question. That incorporated a number of different subparts, which I think is an unfair question to just ask a yes and no answer to. So I object and instruct her not to answer.
We're going to
Ask
go
you to clarify.
We're going to go through each part of the question that I answer, and I'll ask you to give an answer to each part because of your lawyer's objection. Okay? Can we agree that after you administered sodium bicarbonate and insulin to Mr. Allen on March 18, 2013, that there's no evidence in the chart that his cardiac heart alarm went off?
Yes.
Okay. Because there's no evidence in the chart that his cardiac alarm went off after you administered those drugs, do you believe more likely than not that the alarm did not go off after you administered the insulin and sodium bicarbonate?
Well, I object as to the form of that question, but you can answer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Do you recall Mr. Allen receiving dialysis on March 18, 2013?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever called for dialysis for a patient as a nurse?
I called when my patient is ordered dialysis. I call the dialysis unit to determine time of when the patient will be dialyzed.
Okay. Do you know whether or not you made that call in this case?
I don't remember.
Okay. All right. Do you have an idea, or can you tell in those times when you've called for a patient to be dialysized, how long it takes the dialysis people to arrive with the machine?
It all depends on their schedule and what dialysis tech is available.
Okay. If it's ordered on an urgent or stat basis, do you have an idea of the approximate time it usually takes them to arrive?
Objection. Don't guess.
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. Going back to the first couple pages, in exhibit number 1. At 16:25 hours on page 85. Does that indicate that Mr. Allen had a bowel movement?
Yes.
And says, clean patient with floor nurse Michelle. Would that be you?
Yes.
Do you remember assisting the dialysis technician with the cleaning of Mr. Allen at 16:25?
Don't remember that specific event.
Okay. It says at 16:55, cleaned patient's second stool with floor technician. Do you know what the floor technician reference is? Is that the dialysis technician or is that a nurse technician?
Are we still on the same page?
Yes,
oh, I see.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
The floor technician would be the tech working on the IMC.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Do you remember anything else about Mr. Allen's medical condition once dialysis was started on the 18th?
No.
And let's go to the 19th. Have we exhausted your recollection, both independent and from what you gleaned from the chart, as to your interactions with Mr. Allen on March the 19th?
Yes.
All right. Let's go to page, let me show you page 452 of the chart, where it says insulin. Does this reference an administration of insulin to Mr. Allen by you on March 18th?
I don't see insulin on this page.
I'm sorry, sodium bicarbonate. Let me re-ask the question. On page 452 at the top, it says sodium bicarbonate. Does this page reference the administration of sodium bicarbonate to Mr. Allen by you on March 18th?
Yes.
Okay. Now, would it be fair to say that every time you administered a medication to Mr. Allen, there would be an entry in his chart similar to the entry we have on page 452 for the administration of sodium bicarbonate?
Objection.
Are you asking?
Similar on that type of page. Okay. All right.
Are you referring to the administration time and then that it was performed by my name?
Yes.
Then yes.
Okay. So, again, my question is, every time you administered medication to Mr. Allen on March 18th, we would see a similar entry in his chart, similar to the entry we see for the administration of sodium bicarbonate to Mr. Allen that appears on page 452. Would that be a fair statement?
Objection.
Correct.
Did you care for Mr. Allen on any days other than March 18th or March 19th, 2013?
No.
Now, is it your responsibility as a nurse to go over the risks and benefits of the medication that the doctor's ordered for the patient, or is that the doctor's responsibility?
Objection. You can answer.
The doctor that's ordering the medication.
That's his responsibility or her responsibility?
Objection.
You can answer.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And this would then, it would be fair to say in this case that you never reviewed with Mr. Allen any of the risks or benefits associated with taking Caxley?
Objection.
No.
When you were in the room when Dr. Burks ordered, were you in the room when Dr. Burks ordered Caxley for Mr. Allen?
I object.
Dr. Burks ordered the Caxlate through the computer system.
Okay, so it would not be in Mr. Allen's room. It would be at a computer system
There's
on the floor.
no computer in the room.
No computer in the room. And is the computer we're talking about the same computer that's at the nurse's station that you check in to see the patient's chart?
It would be at a desktop. The physicians can use any of the desktops on the unit. They also have their own private office with desktops.
Okay. Now, I don't know if I asked you this question, and I apologize. One way to ask it, if I did, I apologize. Is there any, do you carry any type of electronic device where you scan a patient's armband and scan the medication at the time you administer the medication to the patient?
No.
Okay. So every medication that's administered to the patient, in order for there to be a record of the administration of that medicine to the patient, a nurse would have to manually enter that into the computer. Would that be true?
Objection as to form.
Yes.
If, for example, a nurse administers a medication to the patient and then forgets to make an entry in the chart. Let's say a nurse comes back the next day and says, "Oh, I forgot that I administered a particular medication to the patient." Is there a policy or procedure where the nurse can advise either the nursing supervisor or the hospital administration in order to make a notation of that late entry?
I'm not sure the policy on that.
Okay. Has that ever happened to you?
Objection.
No.
Okay. Maybe that's why you don't know the policy.
Objection. Move to strike.
Okay. Oh, wait. Okay, on page 176, that handwritten note there, you said that was not your handwriting, is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you tell me whose handwriting that is?
That is Kathy Walker's.
Okay, and can you read what she wrote at 8 o'clock a.m.?
0800, patient calm, cooperative, restraints not needed at this time. Signed, C. Walco, RN.
All right. And when Ms. Walco made these entries in the chart, did you review the entries to be sure they were accurate?
Objection. You can answer.
Yes.
Let's go to page 179. There's some strips at the bottom of the page. Two strips, one on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side. Are you familiar with these strips?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me what the one on the left-hand side is?
That is a strip printed from our shift. A
Okay.
cardiac strip from our shift.
Okay. Is that a strip that's printed as a result of an alarm going off for Mr. Allen?
If you know, don't guess.
I don't know.
Okay. Can you interpret that strip at all?
Objection.
I can interpret at the top the blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen status.
Okay, go ahead and tell me what those values are, please.
Okay, so it says that it's room 48 from the 18th at 10:09 a.m. Heart rate at this time is 78. The blood pressure 107/53 with a map of 77. The O2 saturation was 100%.
Okay. Do you know how this got in the chart?
The nurses take a strip during the shift and tape it to the chart.
Okay, so this would be something that you or Nurse Walco did for Mr. Allen in this case.
Correct.
Okay. Can you tell me what the strip on the right side of the chart of page 179 references?
The same thing, but just taken from the night shift.
Okay, do you know what PR means? If you don't know, it's okay.
I don't.
Do you know what any of those abbreviations mean on that strip on the right-hand side?
No.
Okay. When Mr. Allen's cardiac alarm went off around noon, is it the policy and practice for the nurses to take a portion of that strip and attach it to the patient's file?
Objection.
I don't remember.
Did you yourself or did Nurse Warkle take a portion of that strip and attach it to Mr. Allen's chart?
No.
Do you know why?
I don't remember.
Okay. I think we're almost done. Just give me 1 minute. Do you remember, other than what you've already testified to, do you remember any specific contents of any conversations you had with any of Mr. Allen's family?
Nothing that I haven't already said.
Okay. All right. And other than what you've already testified to, do you remember any specific content of any communication you had with Dr. Burks?
Again, nothing that I haven't already said.
Did you interact with any other physician other than Dr. Burks for the care of Mr. Allen on March 18th, 2013?
Not that I remember.
That's all the questions I have for you.
Let's look at this page where Ms. Wilcall made the entries. This is March 18. Well, how would you describe this page? What is this called? A flow sheet?
Flow
Nurse's
sheet.
flow sheet. And this is this particular page. It's page 1655 of my records. It says page 8 of this particular day, March 18, 2013. So there are 3 entries made during your shift, correct?
Correct.
And so each of these entries was made by Ms. Wilcall, correct?
Yes.
And is she's required to document periodically during the day what's happened, correct?
Correct.
But there's only 3 entries made. You were continuously caring for, you and Ms. Wilcall, for Mr. Allen during this time period, correct?
Correct.
And is it accurate that this 3 entries here does not completely describe everything that you and Ms. Wilcall did for Mr. Allen that day?
Correct.
And is it also accurate that the 3 entries here were not made at exactly the same time the treatment or care was provided, correct?
Correct.
So for instance, the entry in the middle of the page at 1400, that is an entry of what had happened for the preceding 2 hours, correct?
Correct.
Because it starts at 12 o'clock, correct?
Correct.
And there was more done to care for Mr. Allen from 12 o'clock until 1400 hours or 2 o'clock than what was described in this note, correct?
Correct.
Some of that you may not remember if it's not documented, correct?
That's correct.
So there was an attempt to document some of the medications that were given to Mr. Allen during this period of time, but the formal record should be made in the medical administration record. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you know why Ms. Wilcall saw it, or why she would have documented some of the medications here in addition to what she documented in the medication administration record?
Do I know why she...
Do you know why she did that?
I do not.
Okay. Now, you were asked about the alarm that goes off. When you say alarm, or Mr. Casson said alarm, that's sort of a vague term. Alarm would mean that there would be an icon that would show up on the computer indicating that there was an abnormality of the heart rate outside the normal parameters. Is that correct?
Correct. On page 4 of 8 of that flow sheet,
Right.
And can you reference the page?
175.
Thank you very much.
At the bottom, it has, heart rate, respirations, blood pressure, SaO2. Right next to that is the alarm parameters that were set for the patient.
Right.
And so anything that's outside of those alarms is going to alarm on the monitor at the patient's bedside with noise, and it also blinks. And then that alarm would be on the central monitor at the nurse's station.
So, but there's not a record in this chart of how long his heart rate stayed bradycardic or how long his T waves or PR waves are stayed abnormal. Is that correct?
It's not documented the exact time, correct?
Okay. Do you remember how long that lasted?
I do not remember.
Okay. So if the alarm had gone off when those abnormalities first occurred, and those abnormalities occurred for a period of time, would another alarm go off, or would there just be a single alarm? Wouldn't there have to be, in other words, wouldn't his parameters have to return to normal and then go abnormal again before another alarm went off?
Objections leading.
With the monitors, when it alarms, like I said, it blinks, and there's also a alarm that you would hear. You can go to the central monitor or in the room and acknowledge the alarm, which stops the flashing, stops the beeping.
Right.
And then if the patient continues to be under that parameter, the alarm only acknowledges it for, I can't recall how many seconds or minutes before it would start to alarm again. So as to your question, if it was continuous, after a certain number of minutes, it would begin alarming again.
Right. And do you know how long his parameters stayed abnormal after it was recognized at about 12 o'clock?
I don't recall how
And
long.
it's not documented?
Correct.
Correct. You were asked about instances when the patient, Mr. Allen, refused care. You recall that you learned that he had refused to have a blood draw the early morning of March 18,
Objection, it's not a testimony.
correct?
I was given a report that he had refused to have his blood drawn.
Okay. And that was not documented by the person who told you that, correct?
Correct, it's not in his note.
And you didn't document that?
I did not document that on the patient's chart, no.
And Ms. Wilcall didn't document that?
Correct.
But you recall that?
I do recall that from the nurse.
And the next day, on March 19, you told us that your independent memory includes that Mr. Allen was refusing a central line, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't document that?
I did not.
Did anybody else document that?
I did not document it because with the help of his family and them being there talking to him, he ultimately allowed us to provide that care.
Right. So, but you don't always document every instance that a patient initially refuses care, is that correct?
Objection, leading.
I would not document refusal of that care because in the end we were able to provide care.
Well, you didn't document that he refused blood draw that morning, and you didn't get a blood draw that morning, correct? On the morning of March 18.
That morning on night shift he had refused, but we were eventually able to get blood from him later in my shift.
Right. That was about afternoon time, correct?
Correct.
Right. Is that the reason why you didn't document it, the earlier
Objection.
refusal?
Objection, leading.
I don't think that's leading, but I stand by it. Is that the reason why you didn't document it?
If he hadn't allowed me to do any type of blood draw at all, then I would have documented that and the physician was aware, but ultimately we were able to get the blood from him.
Do you remember who drew the blood?
I don't remember.
Do you remember who talked to him about the need to draw the blood in the afternoon? Afternoon?
I don't remember.
Can you draw blood?
I can draw blood.
And can Ms. Wilcall draw blood?
She can also draw
Would
blood.
have been one of the two of you that would have drawn the blood?
I don't remember.
It could have been someone else.
The physicians are able to draw blood. The phlebotomists are able to come and draw blood.
So was it documented who drew the blood?
I don't see that it was documented who drew the blood.
That's not always documented, is it?
No.
You don't recall any conversations with Dr. Burks that day, is that correct?
I don't recall anything specific.
Right. So your testimony, any interactions you had with Dr. Burks would have been based on what was charted or recorded, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You haven't talked to Dr. Burks about this case,
I have not.
and you've not talked to Ms. Wilcall about this, correct?
I have not talked to Kathy about this case.
Okay. Now, you had worked with Dr. Burks before, is that correct?
Correct.
How long had you worked, for how many months, or what period of time had you worked with Dr. Burks before March 18 of 2013?
I believe Dr. Burks joined the IMC team that summer of 2012. And so I had worked with him since the summer.
Right, and so you worked only in the IMC unit at that time, correct?
Correct.
So in his discharge summary, Dr. Burks wrote that let me find it here. Dr. Burks wrote on page 3, laboratory data was unavailable as the patient had refused his labs in the morning. Do you know how Dr. Burks, what formed the basis for that? How he learned that?
I can't say for sure how he would have learned that.
Right. But Dr. Burks would have started at 7 a.m. that morning as well, correct?
Correct.
So he would not have been present when the patient had refused the laboratory data from earlier that morning, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And do you have an independent recollection of being advised that the patient, Mr. Allen, had refused the blood draw before your shift started, or are you relying on the medical records? Do you understand the question?
Now, can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Right. So you've already testified that Mr. Allen had refused to have his blood drawn or to have laboratory data blood drawn to perform laboratory data before your shift started on March 18. My question is that based on your independent memory? Is that based on your review of the medical records?
Based on the review of the medical records.
Okay. Do you remember what time the laboratory results were available after they were drawn following this alarm going off, without looking at the medical records?
No, I don't remember.
Without looking at the medical records, do you remember when you gave the K-Exolate?
No, not without looking at the record.
Without looking at the medical records, do you remember whether it was you or Ms. Wilcall who gave the K-Exolate to the patient?
No, I don't remember that.
You testified that K-Exolate was given in an oral form that had been pre-mixed, is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you remember if the K-Exolate was given by itself or with some other fluid before mixed with some other fluid? Let me strike that. Do you remember whether Mr. Allen was asked to take the K-Exolate without any other fluid, or whether the K-Exolate was mixed with another fluid before he took it?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember if the K-Exolate was available in the Omnicell?
I don't remember that.
Just a moment, please. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Just a couple questions, ma'am. I want to show you page 455 of the chart.
Does she have a copy of that?
No, she does not.
What is that?
It's a K-Exolate administration record. And according to page 455, the second medication down from the top, does that reference the K-Exolate that was administered to Mr. Allen on March 18, 2013?
Yes.
Okay. Can you interpret this entry for me and tell me the time that the medication was actually administered to Mr. Allen, and according to the official hospital chart, who actually administered the K-Exolate to Mr. Allen?
The time that it was administered is 13:15, and that was performed by myself.
Okay, thank you. All right. Now, you indicated that you only were able to testify that Mr. Allen refused the blood draw in the early morning hours of the 18th by looking at the medical chart. Can you tell me what page in the medical chart you're referencing when you testified that he refused to have his blood drawn in the early morning hours?
I'm not sure.
Can you tell me when you saw that notation in the chart? Was it before today?
before looking at the medical record, do you mean, or just today?
No. Before today, before you started your deposition,
Okay.
do you know whether or not you saw an entry in the medical chart referencing a refusal of Mr. Allen to have his blood drawn in the early morning hours of March 18th?
I believe that I saw that, unless I did not. I don't remember.
Okay, what I'm trying to figure out is, when your lawyer asks you questions about what are you testifying from, you said it's not your memory, it's from what you saw on the chart. What I'm asking you here today is, can you tell us what entry made by what person that you saw, that you're testifying from, that he refused the blood drawn?
Do we have the doctor's notes from that day, the physician's notes?
We do. Do you think that's where the reference is? Or do you know? I don't want you to guess. If you don't
No,
know.
I don't remember.
Okay, all right, that's fair. All right. Now, if Dr. Burks had told you to draw Mr. Allen's blood at 7:30 in the morning, would you have complied with his request at that time?
Objection.
I would have tried to draw the patient's blood, yes.
Okay. And if Dr. Burks had gave you that order to draw Mr. Allen's blood at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and he refused to allow you to do it, would you make your own note in the chart of that refusal?
Objection.
I would let Dr. Burks know that the patient had refused.
And then would that be part of the record, written record in this case?
Objection.
It's something that could be written down.
Well, there's a difference between
Yeah,
could
yeah,
and should,
sorry.
and it's very important. I want to ask you, in this case, based upon your custom and practice, if Dr. Burks had given you an order and say, Nurse Frock, I want you to draw Mr. Allen's blood now, and he gave you that order at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and you went in, Mr. Allen said, I'm not letting you take my blood, would you then have called Dr. Burks right away, let him know of the refusal, and make a notation of that in the chart?
Objection. About 5 different questions. You can answer.
It would have been my practice if the patient had refused to let Dr. Burks know and to write a note of the refusal.
Thank you. Your lawyer asked you questions about the alarm and I want to talk about it repeatedly going off and off and off, repeatedly sounding. If Mr. Allen's heart rate had continued to be elevated above the parameters set. Do you have any recollection of that alarm going off over and over and over again, the cardiac alarm, on March 18th, after you administered the insulin and sodium bicarbonate to Mr. Allen?
Objection as to form.
After that initial alarm went off, that we let Dr. Burks know, I do not have a memory of the cardiac monitor continuing to alarm and alarm and alarm.
Now, you referred to page 175, and if you can go to that page. And where it says an alarm section at the bottom, okay, you said that the first set of values were the parameters set for the alarms. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Okay. And can you tell me, and are these values that were set between 6 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock in the morning?
These are values that were set for the patient when we came on at 7 o'clock.
Okay. And what were the values for the EKG, for the heart rate? What was the high and what was the low?
The high is 130 and the low is 50.
And respiration?
Respiration high is 70, low is 10.
Blood pressure?
Blood pressure systolic high is 170, low is 50. Diastolic high is 100, low is 40.
Okay, now that's two separate values. One value was entered from the 6 o'clock hour, and another value was entered on the 7 o'clock hour, correct?
In that column, yes.
Yeah, and can you tell me who made the change for the parameters for the alarm for the blood pressure going off?
That's not a change. The way we wrote it in the first column, those are the parameters high and low of the systolic blood pressure, which is the top number. In the second column, it's the parameters written for the diastolic, which is the second number.
Okay, I'm lost completely. But if you can go back to the first column, you said it was 170 over 50, correct?
I'm sorry, 170 over 90.
170
90.
over 90.
Correct.
Okay, and the second set of parameters, is it change from 170 over 90 to 100 over 40?
It's not changed. It's two separate parameters. One for the systolic, that's the first 170 over 90. The second, which is 100 over 40, is for the diastolic of the blood pressure. So if you had a blood pressure, just say 120 over 80, the 120 would refer to the first parameters, 170 over 90. The 80, which is the bottom number of the blood pressure, those parameters would fall the 100 over 40.
I understand now. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Okay. And for this oxygen saturation level?
101 over 90.
Okay. And in column from the hour of 8 to 9, there's somebody's initials there with a line that goes down. Can you interpret that for me?
That says on, and the line going down is to say that the cardiac monitor was on with the parameters in place.
Okay. And according to this chart, did the cardiac monitor remain on continuously during your entire shift with the parameters set that are contained in the first two columns on the alarm section?
That is correct.
All right. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Ms. Frock, you told us earlier that you don't have a lot of independent recollection of what happened on that day, March 18, correct?
Correct.
Most of what you've testified today is based on review of the medical records,
That's correct.
correct? Do you have an independent recollection of the alarm going off, or are you basing that only on the medical records?
I do have a memory of the alarm going off.
Okay. But you don't know for how long the patient's heart rates and blood pressure and the EKG findings stayed outside those normal parameters, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you didn't chart that? Nobody charted that?
Correct.
Okay. And there was no strip preserved from the abnormal EKG readings that occurred sometime after noontime that day, is that correct?
That's correct.
So the protocol is to attach copies of sample strips from 2 times during the day, is that correct?
The protocol is to attach a strip as close to the beginning of your shift as possible so that if there are any changes over the shift, they can be compared to what was printed at the beginning of the shift.
And so the 2 EKG strips that were done were following that protocol early in the shift and then late in the shift, is that correct?
On each shift, so the beginning of day shift, a strip should be printed, and then for night shift, at the beginning of their shift, a strip is printed.
Right. Okay. Did you take report the next day when you came at about 7 o'clock from the night shift nurse?
Yes.
Do you recall anything about that report?
I recall that we were in the room for the report that morning.
I mean, do you recall what she told you, or would you have to rely on the medical
I'd
record?
have to rely on the medical chart.
Okay. Do you know if Mr. Alan had refused any care or treatment during the night shift, and whether that was reported to you.
From my memory, I remember going into the room first thing that morning, and the nighttime physician was at the bedside. They were trying to get better IV access on the patient, and were having difficulty doing that. And that's why the physician was in the room.
So if you look at the flow sheet, nurse's notes from March 18, your shift is 3 times that events are documented, and then on the right-hand side, that's for the evening shift. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you read what's written at 2,200 hours?
Patient, I believe it says agitated. Blood sugar is 49. Can't read that next word. Apple juice given, will monitor. I can't read what's after 49.
240 milliliters?
Oh, yes. 240 mLs apple juice given, will monitor.
All right, and then read what's written at 2230. Some of that's hard to read.
Yeah.
Something blood sugar.
Is 48. Looks like juice and something offered. Patient too tired to eat. At 2300, patient is given D50, 25 milligrams. Patient increasingly agitated and complains of extreme, quote, tiredness. At 00000, patient's blood sugar is 72. MD inserted, ultrasound guided, peripheral IV number 20. Patient changed and repositioned, will monitor.
Okay. And is there any nurse's entry after 10:30 at night until you took over for the next shift at 7 a.m.?
There's nothing written, no.
Okay. Now, in the IMC, for a patient like this, how many patients would a nurse be caring for?
2 to 3.
Okay. On March 18, 2013, do you remember who the other patients were you were caring for, or were you actually caring for 2 or 3 other patients?
I don't remember who else we were caring for.
Okay. Okay, that's all the questions I have.
Just a couple more. Do you have page 172 in front of you? Or not?
What's that?
Page 172.
This part of the flow sheet?
Yeah, it's the first page of the flow sheet. I believe you have it there. Okay. Ma'am, we're talking about the recording of Mr. Allen's heart rate and blood pressure, vital signs. Is page 172 a chart where a nurse or a technician can record Mr. Allen's blood pressure, heart rate, respiration?
Yes.
Okay. Is that the page where the blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration are supposed to be recorded?
Objection.
This is one place this is where vitals are recorded.
Okay. And can you tell me, it looks like there are lines, 4 lines for each hour. It looks like they can be recorded in 1, 2, 3, looks like 15-minute increments. Would that be a fair statement?
That's correct.
Can you tell me what is the policy and procedure at the hospital for how often a nurse or a technician is supposed to record a patient's blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration?
So I object. Is that in general or for a specific patient?
Well, is there a general policy?
On the IMC, patients have this set of vitals every 4 hours.
And I believe you said that there was an electronic monitor that also monitors these 4 vital signs: blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration. Correct?
Correct. It's taken in the room and recorded on that monitor as well.
Is that information captured on the computer system for each half hour? Another place where you capture those values?
Objection.
It's captured on the cardiac monitor.
And is that continuous?
Well, I object as to what you mean by captured, but
Let me ask the question again. What I'm trying to find out, if there is another report or document in Mr. Allen's medical chart that would indicate at every 15-minute interval or every 20-minute interval or every 30-minute interval his blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration, where it's automatically captured from the computer monitoring system and recorded.
That I'm not sure of.
Is there any policy or procedure for increasing the 4-hour intervals for capturing blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration when you have an emergency situation for a patient regarding his heart?
objection.
Not a policy to my knowledge, but every patient on the IMC is every 4 hours.
But I'm talking
Before
about,
I object. Go ahead.
I'm talking about when an emergency happens, such as the emergency that happened to Mr. Allen. His heart monitor went off at 12 o'clock noon. Is there a policy, the procedure, which directs a nurse, listen, instead of waiting 4 hours to do the vitals, we have to do them every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes, or every half hour in light of the emergency that happened at 12 o'clock?
Well, I object as to the form of that.
I'm not aware of that policy.
And according to the chart, the 4-hour interval in recording the blood pressure, heart, respiration continued to be the 4-hour interval even after the heart monitor for Mr. Allen went off at around noon time. Would that be a fair statement?
According to chart, that's correct.
Okay. Right, that's all the questions I have.
So let me ask you about that. The patient is on a continuous telemetry program, correct?
Correct.
So his heart rate, his blood pressure, his respirations, his pulse oximetry is being read 24/7, correct?
Correct.
So what's recorded on this particular page, the purpose of this page is just to record every 4 hours what the vital signs are, correct?
That's correct.
But the vital signs are being continuously monitored second by second in the IMC, correct?
Except for a blood pressure, that you have to physically hit a button to say, take the pressure. But
Right.
the pulse ox, respiration, and heart rate are a continuous read.
And there's also a continuous, at least 4 or 6 lead EKG that's running for the patient, is that correct?
It's not an EKG, it's a 5-lead cardiac monitor.
Okay.
An EKG is a separate run test. It's a 12-lead that you physically have to put the things on.
Right, but there's a 5 lead that gives some more information than just the heart rate, correct?
Correct. It has a cardiac strip with it.
Right. Okay, and that's being run continuously.
That's correct.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
All right, and one last question. From the record we have before us, there's no way to determine how many times Mr. Allen's heart monitor went off after the first time it went off, noontime, and no way to determine if it ever went off after the first time, correct?
From this record, that's correct.
Okay. All right, so that's all I have.
I don't have anything further.
This is the end of the deposition, going off the record as of 12:27 p.m.